Welcome. My name is Kevin Peterson. This is a negotiation and deal-making case study presentation titled A Hard Hobbit to Break. The production for the motion picture The Hobbit, An Unusual Journey had been in the works for decades, Grover 2007. After the success of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, production continued to move forward. However, the fiscally burdened studio of MGM needed to collaborate with New Line Cinema, the studio responsible for the trilogy. MGM held the distribution rights to The Hobbit while New Line Cinema held the rights to make the movie. In 2005, the Lord of the Rings writer, director, and producer Peter Jackson filed a lawsuit against New Line Cinema on income discrepancies on the trilogy's revenues, Grover 2007. A lawsuit that Grover 2007 calls, quote, long-standing and increasingly acrimonious, end quote. After settling the lawsuit, productions resumed only to have its director, Guillermo del Toro, leave, expressing excessive time delays and concerns over MGM's financial state, as reported by Fleming 2010. MGM and New Line Cinema now needed a director. Grover 2007 reported that MGM had just received back the rights to the James Bond franchise but still faced serious financial problems. New Line Cinema needed a hit since they have not had one since the original trilogy. Peter Jackson was already committed to several other projects, but MGM and New Line Cinema knew that he was the only one that could really make the movie. MGM positioned for a partnership. They could not afford to sell the distribution rights and sacrifice losing the potential income from the film. New Line Cinema positioned for a hit franchise. In order to get that hit franchise after a series of box office blunders, they wanted someone who already knew the material and would deliver a blockbuster, Grover 2007. Peter Jackson positioned for control. He had vision for the film and wanted to realize that vision. He was already serving as executive producer and writing the script. The true interest of MGM was to overcome the financial burden weighing on the studio. After selling a European-based broadcasting company, executive Harry Sloan wanted to rebuild the fiscal picture of the studio, but needed the partnership with New Line Cinema to do it, Grover 2007. Although New Line Cinema needed a hit franchise, their real interest was being back in business with Peter Jackson. After all, he was the vision behind the earlier films. Peter Jackson wanted to finish what he started with the Lord of the Rings trilogy. His interest was in seeing it completed. Objective criteria in this negotiation included industry standards from box office figures and precedents. The Lord of the Rings trilogy grossed almost $3 billion worldwide, according to Galloway, Masters, and Bettany, 2013. The three films have collectively set a precedent by winning 17 Academy Awards, including one for Best Director and one for Best Picture. Negative emotions also played a part in this negotiation. To find mutual benefit in this agreement, Peter Jackson and New Line Cinema had to settle the lawsuit. This was the first thing that needed resolved before the negotiation could go any further. To the outsider, the lawsuit sounds as if greed was the motivating factor. New Line Cinema was not budging on their stance, which makes it seem they were being stingy. Peter's claim, while it seemed warranted, looked like greed to New Line Cinema. MGM recognized Peter Jackson's social status as a leading filmmaker that has a large following of fans, according to Grover 2007. MGM also uses the core emotion of role, taking on the temporary role of mediator to bring closure to the lawsuit that Peter Jackson had filed years earlier, Grover 2007. This temporary role is the one thing that went well with this negotiation process. MGM has a vested interest in getting Peter Jackson to direct. They know that to move forward, that New Line Cinema and Peter will have to settle the lawsuit. When MGM modified their conventional role as a negotiation participant to a temporary role as a mediator, they were able to find common ground for both New Line Cinema and Peter and settled the lawsuit. The deal started off on a sour note with the lawsuit. This created negative emotions in the negotiation. New Line Cinema needed Jackson to pull off the film. They needed to put their ego aside and find a mutually agreeable plan to settle the suit and get him on board as director. Peter Jackson needed to curb his anger about being betrayed by New Line Cinema. Some may perceive both parties as being greedy. The lack of trust that was now shrouding the negotiation needed handled if there was any way of salvaging the once prosperous relationship. The parties involved reached agreement in late 2010. Peter Jackson announced that he would be directing The Hobbit: An Unexpected Journey, as reported by Goldberg 2010. Excluding the Tolkien estate and other entities involved with the production, such as the Weinstein brothers, who held the rights to the Lord of the Rings films years earlier at Miramax Films, Galloway et al. 2013 reports that MGM and New Line Cinema will each take 50% of the box office rewards, after paying distribution fees, Grover 2007. Galloway et al. 2013 reported that Peter Jackson has a more complex arrangement with escalating percentages based on how much the movie grosses. What does this mean for Peter? The more money the movie makes, the larger his profit. This negotiation built long-term relationships. While Peter Jackson and New Line Cinema haven't established one, it has been rough. The partnership with MGM will help continue to foster that relationship. The negotiation also fostered a mutual benefit for all parties. MGM is on their way to having a second consecutive billion-dollar film after the most recent James Bond film, Skyfall. New Line Cinema has another successful franchise after years of box office woes. Peter Jackson remains close to the projects that made him a household name. The trio is releasing 2 more films. The next installment is due December 2013. It is a hard habit to break when you have spent most of your career in Middle-earth. Thank you for your time and attention.